Vaccine, 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 vaccine. I'm begging of you people, take a stand.
I'm Elizabeth Felicella, she, her, hers, and I'm in Manhattan, just a few blocks from Columbia, and I photograph architecture.
Hi, I'm Connor. Pronouns are he, him, his. I work on the strategy team at a foundation, and I am also in Manhattan, pretty close to Columbia.
I'm Rachel, use she, her pronouns. I live in Brooklyn, and I went to Columbia as a student and recently taught there as an adjunct.
My name's Joseph Amodi. I use they, them pronouns, and I am a new media artist, theater designer, and activist who just relocated to Pittsburgh to be a professor of immersive media, but I was in New York before this, at the beginning of the pandemic.
My name is Danny, and I go by she, her. I am an artist activist and a volunteer with the Free the Vaccine campaign, and I am super excited to talk to you guys about an action that you guys took with our campaign, an action maybe some of our viewers might like to try. It's very risky, which I love. You guys put masks on statues around Columbia University. Can you talk about how risky that is? And did you guys have any encounters with like security, maybe police? I don't know. Did you have a plan for how to deal with these kinds of people?
We actually did not have any issues with security. And the first time that we did it was, it's funny to think of it now. The first time that we did it was kind of just as people were starting to go out a little bit more. It was like just after the most intense period of the kind of stay-at-home orders. And it was an incredibly beautiful spring, so campus was just perfect. And we kind of had, although we were apprehensive, it was actually the opposite. Like once we were on campus, a lot of students were there getting photographed in their gowns, just, you know, either by friends or family, or they had brought photographers, and it was a real conversation starter. Like a lot of students wanted to know what we were doing. They wanted to be photographed with it. They were really excited about it. So it turned out not to be risky.
Elizabeth is right. We didn't encounter security, but I think we felt apprehensive about taking up space during graduation, since there was, you know, at points it was kind of busy. So we really just sort of wanted to watch for a break in the crowd and look for a point where we wouldn't be actually intruding on people waiting to take photos with the statue, so as not to seem, you know, so as not to sort of drive people away from the message. So once it was kind of up and once we had the space, people were really interested in it, but we were really sort of conscious of the fact that it was a time of celebration, and it was a time where people wanted sort of their space and to celebrate their accomplishments. So we were conscious of that, less so the kind of security situation, but just more so what space we were taking up in public.
It sounds like then you didn't really have a plan for in case you did get faced with security, or maybe like, because I was wondering if along those lines, if you had any suggestions for people who might want to try this kind of action.
I think it's important, like if security approaches you, to realize like they're doing their job, you know, and you don't want to do something that's going to get them in trouble. And just by kind of, I think by respecting that and answering, you know, like kind of engaging them and talking and not taking an adversarial position, sometimes you can leave it up long enough to get a picture, or, you know, like you can kind of reach, like I think it's really important not to consider those people like the enemy. I think our strategy was more like practical, where we had like extra tape and extra strings so that we could do things really fast. We knew we weren't going to leave things.
And I think I was worried about that, like having been a student and knowing that typically have very strict rules about like what you can and can't put up on surfaces and around campus. But I think something that helped was that it was meant to be temporary, and like Elizabeth sort of early on was like, we shouldn't leave this up. Like, people are trying to celebrate graduation at a time that's so hard, so we don't want to impede that. And so going in with that, I think, really helped.
It was a good lesson in, like, by doing something that was creative and that was also kind of meant to be supportive and kind, it didn't feel aggressive, you know, to be out there and doing this. And I think that that's, you know, a part of why we got the response we did. You know, it was, people were very, they were eager to talk, you know, it was.
And the message on the sign was "Be well." You know, the process was sort of like very like care centered in the way we sort of thought about the action and the message we were communicating. And that sort of like started with the materials we used and like the way they were presented, and all the way out through the message of how, and like who they would reach. So it wasn't like we were like, you know, F Columbia for like not for being terrible with like their intellectual property. It was like, you know, like putting on this like mantle of like kindness and care and concern that alma mater sort of has for the university, and sort of extending that out. Yeah, I've been reflecting on sort of about this this process actually. Like I've done, you know, various types of artistic activism for a while now, but a certain part of it has certainly been much more adversarial. And this process was a real shift in thinking about sort of like building like allyship towards a common end instead of building like adversity to like trigger a desired outcome, to sort of build allyship and like positive messaging in a like terrible time to like try and like encourage the right thing to happen. So that's something that was like a real big shift that I noticed about this whole process, and I think is a sort of response to this sort of very present calamity, particularly of doing this like in New York at the beginning of the pandemic when it was all much more unknown and terrifying. Still is.
It also didn't feel like a normal time to be making an intervention in public space. So there were a lot of, I think, factors that I would normally have thought of. That maybe my risk profile would have been different in thinking in terms of it being a normal time, but really and truly, like, people were in such a sort of heightened state of awareness of everyone around them and what was going on, that I think like a mask on a statue felt like something like almost more normal than what was going on around everyone else. So I think there was also something about the time that we did this and the way that sort of, you know, people were there for a celebration. Pretty much every person on campus was there in a robe, you know, taking a picture in front of a statue. And there was this sense of sort of like general camaraderie and sort of an awareness that the space and the surrounding area was just totally different than it normally is. So it felt like an opening as well in a way that would maybe have normally been more heavily policed or would have stood out more, but it really, I think, felt kind of normal, and you know, everything was outsized. You know, everyone's sort of feelings and thoughts were outsized at that point.
We put a mask on Frederick Douglass, who is just a few blocks from campus. And that was the morning, there was that plaza was the start of Black Lives Matter, one of the early, really big Black Lives Matter marches. And that was a very different feeling, because there, the apprehension was, it wasn't security, it was kind of how it would be received by different members of the community. And there was this overwhelming response of like, thank you for taking care of him. You know, it was actually like, it was seen as a very kind of caring, like a gesture of respect in that context, to mask a statue, which I find really, that to me was very gratifying, that kind of so many things could come together, that it's meant to be protest, but that it's also then very caring and very protective, like protecting what matters.
It was kind of in part to sort of create the media image, since there wouldn't be as many people walking on campus who would normally see this type of thing, particularly at that time. So it was like hopefully to make this imagery and disseminate it across the interwebs.
And how did that go? Like, how was the social media journey of these images?
We thought it would be pretty easy to get someone to write about it, and that was, no one wrote about it. So like, we spent a while like writing a press release and sending it out to like Columbia publications and then other nearby local publications, and no one picked it up. But then when I reached out to a undergrad political magazine and wrote like a short kind of pitch for an article, and then it was like, oh great, like you want to write this article, then we'll publish it. So that, I think, is how the pictures got out within the Columbia community. It was like more work on our part.
Well, congratulations on getting at least one article. I hope you get more. So do you feel like that it was a successful action, or have you maybe thought about doing it again, maybe doing it a little bit differently? I was also wondering, like the masks are made out of paper, so I was wondering if you had thought at all about how to make them waterproof so that they could last longer.
We've thought about doing the action again as people come back to campus, and sort of make this, the point that, you know, things haven't really changed since we did it the first time, but we're still figuring out exactly what that would be, and also how many people will be on campus, and the best sort of time and circumstances to do it. But we have thought about doing it again in some form.
I mean, and the dream is masks all over the world are placed on statues everywhere of good faith and nature, and are, you know, building this sort of monumental monument support.
I love that. I love that idea. And I hope that people try it and experiment more too with how to make some of these masks.
About the statue action as well, I would just also add that we did it twice. We did it the first time, and then we looked at the pictures, looked at the lighting, looked at everything, and decided it could be done certain ways better. So credit to Elizabeth for actually making that call and saying we need to do it again. But it was done sort of iteratively. It was done, you know, with the understanding that we could try it again if it wasn't exactly visually what we wanted the first time.
And the tutorial video you made, was that after the second time or the first time? Like, did the masks change at all?
The only adjustment to the masks was the longer strings.
Thank you guys so much for taking the time to talk to me today and with our viewers. And if there's any updates, please let me know, because we can do another follow-up video.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Well, thank you and best of luck.
Yeah.